So welcome to the second part of this video. Now we're going to talk about the relative theory of money and how it works in practice. So first we have to start with the principle of relativity. As you know, in the current system, you have a money supply that fluctuates and you have goods and services that fluctuate. And they don't fluctuate, they're trying to fluctuate the different institutions like the central bank and private banks and all the people that are involved in managing the monetary system try to make the money supply and the amount of available goods and services fluctuate pretty much in sync so that you have a stability in the value of your money and that you don't have inflation or deflation or these kinds of problems. But of course, that's a very tough thing to do. I mean, the money supply is based on the policy of the central banks and on how much private banks are able to lend into the economy. And so if nobody wants to take any loans, then, you know, you have, which is kind of what happened in the 2008 crisis, among other things, then you have a problem. And obviously, the amounts of available goods and services in the economy depend on a million factors, including, you know, decisions of millions of people, individual decisions of millions and millions of people every day, of what they buy, when they buy it, and so forth. So it's a very difficult thing to predict and to stabilize, which is why you have periodically all these crises and these kind of cyclical business cycles and all that stuff. The principle of relativity means that you're trying to devise a stable frame of reference and then measure all other things compared to that frame of reference. The metric system is such an example. Time, you know, our clocks are such an example. We're basically defining a stable measuring stick and then against which we measure everything else. You're not using your thumb to measure distances. You're using one stable frame of reference and then applying it across the board. In Einstein's principle of relativity, that stable frame of reference is the speed of light, and then you look at how other things fluctuate compared to that. So you have one thing stable, and then the other things can fluctuate, and that's okay because you have that one stable frame of reference. In the current economic and monetary system, it's as if your measuring stick was, you know, shrinking and expanding, and you're trying to make it, you know, kind of fluctuate in sync with the available goods and services, which is a pretty tough thing to do. So, in the relative theory of money, that problem has been solved with what you call a universal dividend as a frame of reference. So basically how that works is following. As I said, like every month, for instance, I think this is months. Or you can actually say these are years. So you receive 300 units of money per year. And you have 3 people. And they all start off with a different amount of money. Because obviously this one, for instance, has 4,500, so he's been very good at managing his money. He's been trading a lot and being very successful, so he's accumulated a little bit more wealth. This one has 3,000, so he's kind of in the mean. It's important. And this one probably, you know, spent more than he got. And over time, you see the 300 is the value of the universal dividend, or UD. Over time, the universal dividend grows exponentially. So here, 10% per year. Okay? So in individual units of money, the relative wealth that each has after 20 years, let's see, these are years. After 20 years, they pretty much have the same. They still have 1,500 of difference worth, but if you look at the percentage of wealth, imagine that this is all the money there is in the economy, the total money supply. In the beginning, this guy controlled 50% of the money supply. This guy controlled 33% of the money supply, and this guy controlled, what is it, 17? Yes, 17% of the money supply. In the end, this guy still controls 33, and the other two are extremely close. This one is like 35 or something, and this one is like 30 or 32% of the money supply. So as time grows, everybody gets closer to the mean. But people will say, well, first of all, you're adding exponentially money into the system. How does this not cause inflation? I mean, that's crazy. Well, first of all, since everyone gets the increase, then you're not really reasoning in terms of individual units of money. You're reasoning in terms of relative percentage of the money supply that you control, which gives you access to sort of a basket of the total amount of goods and services in the economy. That's the first thing. So in year one, this guy has access to 50% of all total goods and services produced. After 20 years, if no trade happens, nothing happens, if nobody trades, if trade stops, and let's say that nobody exchanges anything, or that they only receive the universal dividend, they don't trade it. After 20 years, this guy can only access 35% of the total goods and services in the economy. Now, how do prices get displayed? That is the key factor here to explain why there's no inflation. Because if you count in individual units of currency, then you always have to update the price, every year, for instance, because there's so much money added into the economy that your prices have to double or whatever. If you count in universal dividends, and that's your frame of reference, then you can scratch this. You don't have to worry about the individual units of money. You use the universal dividend as a frame of reference. So you just say that, for instance, one universal dividend equals 30 units of currency on year one, and then one universal dividend equals 33 individual units of currency on year two. And as you can see here, the person that is in the mean, that owns 33% of the wealth, if he stops exchanging, what is his amount of universal dividends? He has 10 universal dividends consistently throughout time, even though there is in individual units, he has still more and more. In universal dividends, he still has 10, which means as a store of value, if you're in the mean, so if you, for instance, imagine that this guy basically spends 10 every year and receives 10 every year, that it means he puts as much work as he spends, then his wealth is extremely stable. It stays the same. Or even if he stops trading, it stays the same. After 20 years, he has exactly the same amount of universal dividends. So say you can, and of course you can use universal dividends to count and display prices in. So instead of using individual units of currency, instead of saying, for instance, I don't know, a car is worth 600 units of currency, you just say a car is worth 2 universal dividends. And that price, the display of the price stays the same. It's still 2 UD. At year 10, it's still, the car costs still 2 universal dividends. But the individual amount of units of currency will be necessary to buy that car will be more. But since everyone gets the upgrade, everyone gets an equal distribution of the currency, then it doesn't really matter, does it? I mean, you know that you're going to get the same upgrade or share of the total money supply as everybody else. So this system is basically a co-produced, everybody produces an equal share of the monetary base. That's the underlying philosophy, not only in space, location, but also across time. Now, this is really important, and I'll explain this with this slide. So the current monetary system just works like a giant monopoly. And at crucial times throughout the history of the monetary system, there is what you call a sort of a reset, like the Great Depression, 1929 and onwards, where you have a complete collapse of the monetary system and you have to start almost nearly from zero. At that point, it's like starting a new game of Monopoly. After a certain number of years, some people win, some people lose, some people are successful businessmen, some others not so much. And of course, wealth gets accumulated in a certain number of hands. And if the taxation system fails to redistribute that money, it's basically as if, and if you pass that wealth on to your children, it means that the children basically start playing the Monopoly where the parents left it off. Instead of starting afresh with a totally new game of Monopoly, they pick up wherever their parents left it off. Of course, you could say that is unfair, and then others people would say, well, yeah, but if you put some effort into it, there's always a way to be successful. I mean, and you get into all this debate, toxic debate between the right and the left. Egalitarianism versus meritocracy, and here it's really just mathematical, pure mathematics. The way the system is geared is that after about 80 years, because this is kind of life expectancy, the formula generating the monetary base is and the value of the universal dividend, the upgrade in the value of the universal dividend is based on life expectancy. What this means is that this is one generation, for instance, and what happens is the total money generated by a generation, for instance, one that was born in the 1970s and that dies somewhere in 2054, because after 80 years, basically, the entire population is completely different. Like nearly everyone has died. And you have a completely new generation. And nobody from the old one is alive. From this one is alive. The amount of money that they produced across their lifetime is basically proportional to the percentage that this generation represents in the population. So if once they die, basically, because the universal dividend grows exponentially, the total money that they have produced across their lifetime is worth almost nothing. It just decreases exponentially, especially in universal dividend. The number of units, for instance, of universal dividend here is ridiculous compared to the number of units produced here. So the money that they have produced when they were babies, for instance, or when they were teenagers, or even when they started, when they graduated, gets diluted because the money supply grows exponentially. So it's almost a mathematical process where each generation gets the opportunity to start playing this Monopoly game from scratch, from zero, and starts, almost fresh. Obviously, this poses many problems for people, I think, in terms of philosophy, in terms of acceptance. Why would they deserve this? And, of course, we could just say, well, it's a human right. Everybody has the right to be alive and to have a certain amount of decency in their lives. But we can go a little bit beyond that, and you need to reflect a bit on how money works and why you should be allowed to do this. So let's go back to our three producers. I've already explained a bit how the exchanges can take place. Of course, let's assume that this guy has 5 corn again. This one has 5 fish, 5 bread. If they each receive 10 units of currency, and now this is, for instance, equals 1 UD. And they exchange again in a circle like this, and they each get their UD back, but then the next day they get another 10, and now they have 2 UD. Does it really matter? I mean, if they just trade in a circle, they each control 3% of the total money supply. And if you put all the goods together here, 5 fish, 5 bread, 5 corn, they each get 33% access to these goods and services. So, you really don't care. You don't really count in units, not even in universal dividends, because this stabilizes only after a certain number of years. Because when you really start this economic system from scratch, obviously as new universal dividends get added, then prices do fluctuate quite a bit. But if you reason in terms of percentage of the total money supply they control, you don't really care about prices. You know that they will be able to access 33% of the total amounts of goods and services available in the economy. And obviously, if one of them works harder or provides a good or service that is more necessary to the community, they may get a little more, and then they'll get access to 50% of the goods, total goods and services in the economy, because they will have accumulated more universal dividends or more units of this currency. But as time goes by, their share will diminish because it will be diluted in new units of currency that are generated. And this is just, it's basically as if you stop working tomorrow and you stop trading tomorrow, then the total wealth that you've accumulated will sort of diminish. So, one other thing that I want to point out is this idea that, where does money come from? We've covered that. But why would these guys have the right to create their own monetary system? Isn't that illegal? I mean, isn't that crazy? Well, not so much, actually. If you just forget for a moment that these people are businesses and just imagine that they're two buddies, and the fisherman helps the farmer to move out. He goes for 3 hours to his house and says, I'm going to give you a hand and help you move out from your farm to a bigger farm. I'm such a good drawer. Well, of course, you don't really do that between friends, but there is this kind of, you've just created money without even realizing it. There is this kind of recognition that this guy owes 3 hours to this guy. He gave up 3 hours of his time and transferred those 3 hours to this guy to help him out. And you're never going to say that because there's this trust between friends that you're going to, return the favor at some point. What this is called is a informal IOU, which is exactly the same thing as a dollar bill or a euro bill. It's exactly the same thing, except the dollar and the euro bills are a universal, or at least they try to make it a universal IOU, that you can trade with other people outside. For instance, if this guy creates a voucher, an IOU voucher for 3 hours of his work, and writes down on a piece of paper, hey, thanks, buddy, you've given me 3 hours of your time. I'm going to give you a little voucher that says you have the right to ask me for 3 hours of your time. Can he trade that voucher? Can you trade that voucher with a baker, for instance, and say, here, I'll give me some bread and you can trade this voucher with my buddy and he'll help you out, move or whatever. You can't do that. It's not a universal IOU. Now, if you give him, on the other hand, $30, he can go and trade those goods, or the time that you invested into him. If he transfers those $30 to you, then he can access other services. He doesn't have to go back to you and say, well, you're the one that I helped, so you have to return the favor. That's all that money is. That's the only thing that it serves a purpose. It's like a universal redeemable debt. that you trade back and forth between people. And the banks are there only to create this kind of trust between people, a universal kind of trust, so that it can be traded back and forth. And the states also, governments. It's very important that you have stable governments to create that kind of trust for the IOUs that are used in their country. But this can be anything. They have time banks that exist that create their own IOUs, so to speak. You have local currencies. You have now crypto. But each of these currencies is, if you use it as money, then you have to look at the features, of course, of it. Make sure that it checks out, make sure that its value is stable, make sure that it's a means of exchange, and make sure that it's a unit of account. And if it doesn't check out, then you can use it, but you don't have a guarantee that 30 or 40 years down the line you can still use it as you've used it before, or that that trust element is there. So back to the relative theory of money. If you follow this reasoning, you understand that in terms of store of value, well, of course it has store of value, especially if you're in the mean. If you're not in the mean, then it's a little different. But don't forget that in our current system, the store of value of money is not so different from the universal dividend, which is why if you're rich and you have more of the money supply, you're not putting it on your savings account. You're putting it in stocks and bonds and other kinds of, you can try to speculate with it, because you know that with the money supply growing at a rate of about 10%, even in our current system, inflation would be around, 2 or 3%, depending. Your money is also going to lose value, not as fast as in this system, but still pretty fast. And so, even in our current system, the stability of the fiat currencies that we're using, like a dollar or whatever, its value over 100 years, you'll find has dropped about 98%. So if you got some money in the 1920s and you put it under your mattress and you took it out now and expected to buy the same amount of goods and services, well, sorry to say, it lost over 90% of its value. So it is as much a store of value as a regular currency, I would say, but it's especially designed for a store of value that goes back to a mean, where everyone sort of has a similar amount of the money supply if they stop trading after a certain amount of time. If you keep on working and you keep on accumulating wealth, obviously your wealth grows normally. You can get very rich, no problem. But if you stop providing a certain service, or if you stop providing goods and services in the economy and stop trading, then your wealth is going to gradually diminish. A means of exchange, of course, that's just by convention. If people accept your money, then it's a means of exchange. If they don't, it's not. And a unit of account, you can see that this is very easily broken down into and can be calculated with, especially if you use the universal dividend as a frame of reference. Here's an illustration of what happens if you're very rich and you stop trading. Over time, the amount of money that you have, the share of the money you have in the money supply diminishes and tends to go to the mean. And if you're extremely poor, as time goes by, if you stop exchanging and do nothing, your share of wealth also goes to the mean. Now, this brings me to the way that you consider money. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say one thing that's really important. This way of creating IOUs is called mutual credit. It's almost as if each person is his own bank and they issue out these IOUs to each other. And this is what existed before money. There was no barter, actually. It was just people that were creating tabs to make sure that to sort of keep a check on who owes what to who. I mean, if the baker is slacking off and he gets too many tabs over at the fisherman and at the farmer, then you have social pressure in small villages and saying, you better get to work because your tab is full and we won't give you any goods and services. So you better give us some bread so that your tabs is erased. Of course, at the scale of a country, this is why we switched to these kind of universal IOUs, because it's really difficult to work with other things. But now, with relative theory of money, money is more considered of sort of an equal voting right on what has value. Every time you spend money in a store, what you're doing is you're signaling the market. You're voting on what should get produced. If you buy a certain food, if you buy a certain clothing product, you're sending a signal to the market saying, I like this, make more of it. I like these, this beverage. I like this bread. I like this t-shirt produced in a Chinese sweatshop by children. Please make more of that. And in the current system, there are basically three big actors that distort two big actors that distort what, but in three ways, distort how what gets produced and vote on, the economy that you get and the goods and services that are produced. The first one is banks. And this is the way they do it. I mean, you have two businessmen that walk into a bank. One is a guy that has a project for permaculture, organic food growth. And of course, his business plan is a little shaky. I mean, he expects about a 2% return, and he needs to do a lot of investment. He's not very good with, checking out how the market works and all that. He just is very idealist and wants to grow some good organic food and sell it to the community. But, he didn't do all the business schools and stuff, so he doesn't know how to present the project in a very sexy way. So he goes to the bank and says this, and the bank says, well, no, that's way too risky. We're not going to lend to you. Sorry. Then you have this guy that, walks out of business school. He has this idea of this little gadget that is completely useless. But he has an awesome marketing plan of how to spoon feed it into people's, homes, make sure that people think they need it. And he has a 10% expected growth rate, and he has all the marketing plan, all the advertising set out. He has, partnerships. He has venture capital ready almost, he has initial investments, everything. And the bank says, yes, sure, go ahead, and he has a factory in China that will produce it cheap, and he has a 80% margin, blah, 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 all this stuff. And so what happens is sometimes something really important to the community that has a lot of social value, you could say, or value in plenty of different things like, health, the environment, or whatever, doesn't get produced because it just doesn't fit into the little box. It doesn't tick all the boxes that private banks require, which is making sure that you generate profit above anything else. Because if you're not profitable, you go out of business, and then, the bank is in trouble. And why, certain things that are extremely detrimental to, society gets produced because they tick all the boxes in terms of, for the bank and the way the financial system and the economy works right now. So that's the first actors that distort what gets produced. The second is the ultra rich. Because they are a shareholder. They don't put their money in savings account. They usually invest it, and when they invest it, they put the money in whatever business gets them the highest returns. The ecological, social considerations are things that are very rarely thought about. So if they put their money in big oil, in, GMO pesticides and all kinds of companies like that, then so that's how you end up with so-called choices in consumer capitalism, which is you have the choice between Coke and Pepsi, or between Intel and AMD, or between Boeing and Airbus. And obviously, it's not that much of a choice. So the ultra-rich, by where they put their money, influences it. And the ultra-rich, by what they put their money in terms of government or funding campaigns, political campaigns, obviously distorts also what gets produced or what can be produced within the economy. And this is this image of the wrecking ball, basically skewing the elections. We know that any business, and this is a big problem across the board, be it inside this capitalist system, since it's dog eat dog. Any business will try to skew politics to make sure that the laws and the regulations are more favorable to its interests and are disfavorable to its competitors. So those are the main ways that there's sort of a distortion in the voting rights. There's also, in terms of policy, for instance, a big distortion in terms of wages. I was talking about the T-shirt produced in a Chinese sweatshop by children, and you could say, well, yeah, people could just be more responsible and change their consumption patterns. But obviously, if you have policies that compress the wages of workers to the bare minimum, and they're struggling even to make ends meet, well, when they're confronted with two choices, one a $5 T-shirt and one a $50 T-shirt, one produced in China and the other produced, by a local factory employing workers with decent wages and all that stuff, what do you think they're going to buy if they're already stretched, if their budget is already stretched? So there's so many ways that the economy is distorted because of the way the monetary system works. In a system based on the relative theory of money, everyone has an equal voting right on what has value across time. So, for instance, if you think that a pop artist is awesome and you go to his concert, you have that universal dividend, you can buy his concert ticket, and he's going to be really, really wealthy after his first concert in terms of the percentage of the total money supply that he controls. And if he stops doing any concerts, then his share of the money supply will just diminish, and he'll return to the mean and have a sort of a equal basic access to all the available goods and services. So it's almost like a giant permanent crowdfunding system, where at each point in time, people can decide, well, this I think has value now, and maybe 10 years from now, they'll shift their focus to something new or something else. And so obviously the economy will reflect much more adequately or much more, democratically, let's say, the real preferences of people and the real things that they hold to heart. So some of the consequences. A predictable monetary base is a first consequence. So there can be no speculation. Like right now, everybody's looking at what the Fed is going to do. What is the ECB going to do? Are they going to raise interest rates, lower interest rates? How's the economy doing? And how's the money supply fluctuating? How can we time the market to speculate on this? In this kind of system, the population is known, the life expectancy is known, the number of people inside this kind of monetary system is known. Everything is known, and you can predict how much money is going to be in the economy 20 or 30 or 50 years from now. So there's nothing you can speculate about, which brings us to no more information asymmetry or speculation. You can't time the market. You can't gain a sort of an advantage in trying to manipulate the markets or time the Fed's decision or something. Because everything is known. There's no more information asymmetry. There's an embedded redistribution of wealth, which is there's a sort of mathematical ceiling for wealth accumulation and a mathematical floor on poverty. So you cannot get poorer than a certain amount, and you cannot get richer than a certain amount, simply because your relative share is going to decrease over time naturally. No generation is advantaged by the money creation mechanism. And it's a philosophy based on economic freedom. So there's no obligation to join such a network. This is really a monetary system which respects democracy 100%. So you only join if you agree with the underlying philosophical principles. There is not this kind of philosophy of, which is the one of the current monetary system, by the way, is either you use our IOUs or we put you in jail because you're counterfeiting money or you're violating regulation and laws. And this is what's happening now with cryptocurrencies, and the sort of regulatory panic around it is that they're trying to figure out what to do with this, because it's almost like private money. Which brings me to the last part. A cryptocurrency based on this relative theory of money already exists, and it's called Junitor, and the universal dividend is called the G1 or June, pronounced June, and you can check it out on the official website. And it's just a cryptocurrency voluntarily adopted by a community of like-minded people that want to trade using this underlying philosophy of having an equal right in determining what has value or not, and exchanging goods and services based on this currency. So I invite you to check it out, and maybe I'll do a further video also discussing some of the practical implications of how a financial system could work based on the relative theory of money in practice. I mean, would there be banks? Would there still be banks? Would there still be, how would big companies function, and so on?